You said it 3 times. You said it clearly the first time, more slowly the second time, and by the third time, you were practically drawing a diagram in the air with your hands. And they still didn't get it, or they didn't want to get it. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with. Why did you keep going? Why did you reach for a 4th explanation when the first 3 landed on deaf ears? Because somewhere along the way you developed a belief. And the belief is this: if I just explain it well enough, if I just find the right words, this person will finally understand me. This person will finally agree. This person will finally give me the thing I've been standing here trying to earn, which is their approval, their permission, their blessing. Here's the confession nobody wants to make. Most people aren't tired from working too hard. They're tired from explaining too much. They're exhausted from spending their energy justifying their choices to people who are never going to nod along, no matter how good the argument was. They've made this quiet arrangement with themselves that says, I'm not allowed to move forward until the people around me understand why. And that arrangement is one of the most crippling agreements you can ever sign. Because what it really says is my progress is being held prisoner by other people's understanding. And understanding from someone who doesn't want to understand is a thing you will never get back. Now, where did this come from? Where did we pick up the idea that we owe everybody a full accounting of our decisions? It started early, like most of these things do. When you were a child and you wanted something, you had to make a case. Why do you want that? Explain yourself. Give me a good reason. And that was fair at the time. A child needs to learn to reason, to justify, to think through consequences. But here's what nobody told you. Nobody came back later when you were grown and said, that skill you learned, asking permission and explaining your reasons, that was for when you were small and dependent. That was for when other people were responsible for you. It was never meant to follow you into adulthood as a permanent requirement for living your own life. Nobody made that distinction. And so most people are still standing at the kitchen table of their childhood, hat in hand, waiting for someone bigger to say, all right, you may proceed. Except now they're 40 years old, and the people they're waiting on don't have any authority over them at all. They just have opinions. And opinions dressed up as approval have become the toll they pay before they let themselves take a single step. Here's how this plays out. You make a decision, a good one. You decide to change careers or start something new, or end a relationship that was draining you, or move to a different city. And the first thing you do before you've taken a single action is you go find someone to tell. And you don't just tell them, you explain. You lay out the reasons. You anticipate their objections. You build your case like a lawyer preparing for trial, and then you wait for the verdict. You watch their face for the flicker of understanding, the little nod that says, yes, that makes sense. I approve. And when it doesn't come, when they frown or shrug or say, I don't know, that sounds risky. Something inside you deflates. You feel the doubt creep in. Not because they had a better argument, but because you were counting on their agreement to give you permission to feel good about your own decision. And they didn't give it. So now you're stuck explaining harder, defending louder, trying to squeeze approval out of a person who has no intention of handing it over. Here's what I want you to understand tonight, and this is important. Understanding is not something you can force into another person. It isn't a lock you can pick if you just find the right key. Some people don't understand because they can't. And some people don't understand because they won't. And those are two completely different situations that require two completely different responses. The person who can't understand simply lacks the information or the experience or the perspective to see what you see. With that person, explaining helps. You add a piece here, a detail there, and eventually the picture comes into focus for them. That's a good use of your breath. But the person who won't understand is a different animal entirely. That person has already decided. Before you opened your mouth, they knew where they stood. And every word you offer, every reason you present, every diagram you draw in the air is not landing on an open mind. It's bouncing off a closed door, and you can knock on a closed door for the rest of your life. It doesn't open just because you knocked politely enough. Most of us can't tell the difference. We treat the closed door like it's merely stuck. We think, if I just push a little harder, if I just find the perfect phrasing, it'll swing open. And so we spend years, whole relationships, entire seasons of our lives, pushing on doors that were locked from the inside on purpose. Now, I want to be careful here, because I know how this can sound. I'm not telling you to become closed off. I'm not telling you to stop communicating, to stop listening, to wall yourself away from every opinion that isn't your own. That's not what this is about at all. Communication is beautiful. Understanding, when it's mutual, is one of the great gifts of being alive. But there's a difference between communicating with someone who is meeting you halfway and pouring yourself out for someone who is standing perfectly still with their arms crossed. One of those is a conversation. The other is a performance. And you've been giving performances to empty theaters, wondering why nobody's clapping. Think about what an explanation actually is. When you explain yourself, you're doing two things at once. You're sharing information and you're seeking acceptance. Now, for most healthy communication, those two things travel together and nobody notices. But when you're explaining yourself to someone who won't listen, the information part is useless because they don't want it. So, all that's left is the acceptance, seeking part, and that's the part that costs you. Because every time you explain yourself to a person who has already refused to understand, you're really saying, please tell me it's okay. Please give me the thing I can't seem to give myself. And they hear that. They may not say it out loud, but they hear the neediness underneath your words. And it puts them in a position of power over you they never earned. You handed them the keys. You made them the judge. And now you're standing in their courtroom, pleading your case when the truth is you were free to walk out the door the whole time. There was no judge. There was no verdict required. There was just a person with an opinion. And you promoted that opinion to the level of law. Now, let me show you what this costs, because I don't think most people have ever added it up. And until you see the invoice, you'll keep paying it without ever noticing the drain. Think about the last time you had a real decision to make, something that mattered. And think about how much of your energy went into the deciding and how much went into the explaining. For most people, the ratio is upside down. They spend a little energy figuring out what they want and an enormous amount of energy preparing to defend it. They rehearse the conversation in the shower. They play out the objections in their head while they're trying to fall asleep. They compose little speeches they'll never deliver, refining the phrasing, sharpening the reasons. Also, they'll be ready when someone challenges them. And that mental rehearsal isn't free. It's using the same fuel you need to actually do the thing. Say you have a limited amount of energy each day. Everybody does. And say a full third of it goes to explaining, defending, justifying, worrying about what people will think, and preparing responses to arguments that may never even come. That's a third of your life force spent not on building your life, but on defending your right to build it. A of a day times 7 days a week, times 52 weeks a year. Do that math, and you'll find that people spend the equivalent of 4 full months a year in the courtroom, pleading a case that never needed to be played. 4 months of mental energy gone. Not to the work, not to the goal, to the anxious anticipation of other people's disapproval. And in 5 years, that's 20 months. Nearly 2 years of your one life spent rehearsing defenses and delivering explanations to people who had already made up their minds before you started. That's not a rough patch. That's a pattern, and the pattern is quietly bleeding you dry. But it's not just the energy. It's what that energy would have built if you'd kept it. That's the part people miss. They think an hour spent explaining is just an hour. They think it's neutral, but it's not neutral because while you were busy building your case, you weren't building your life. While you were composing the perfect argument for why your choice made sense, you could have been out there proving it made sense by living it. Every hour you spend seeking approval is an hour you didn't spend making the approval irrelevant. And here's the cruelest part. The approval you're chasing usually comes only after you've stopped chasing it. The people who doubted you don't come around because of your explanations. They come around when they see the results, and you can't produce the results if all your energy is tied up in the explaining. So, the very thing you're trying to earn is being blocked by the way you're trying to earn it. Let me put two people side by side. Same goal, same ability, same doubters in their lives. Family members who don't get it. Friends who think it's foolish. Co-workers who roll their eyes. The only difference is this. One of them explains and the other one acts. The one who explains spends the first month making their case, talking to everyone, justifying, defending, managing everyone's feelings about their decision. By the end of the month, they've had a dozen exhausting conversations and produced nothing but tension. The one who acts spends that same month working quietly. They didn't call a meeting. They didn't take a vote. They just began. By the end of the month, they've got something to show. And here's what happens next. The doubters, who couldn't be moved by any argument, start to shift the moment. They see something real. Not because the arguments finally got good enough, because the results made the arguments unnecessary. Now stretch that out over a year. The explainer is still explaining, still defending, still tangled up in what everyone thinks. And the actor is a year into building something. The gap between them isn't a gap in talent. It's a gap in where they chose to spend their breath. One spent it on the people who wouldn't listen. The other spent it on the work that would eventually speak louder than any explanation ever could. Now I want you to look at your own life with this kind of honesty. 'Cause I don't think most people ever have. Most people have never sat down and asked, how much of my energy is going to convince people who have already decided not to be convinced? They don't track it. They don't count it. And because they don't count it, they can't see it. It's like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it day to day, But every morning the tire is a little lower, and eventually you're driving on the rim and wondering why the whole ride feels so hard. That's what over-explaining does. It doesn't blow out all at once. It leaks slowly, quietly, one unnecessary justification at a time, until one day you realize you're exhausted. And you can't quite say why. The reason you can't say why is that the drain was invisible. It didn't come from doing too much. It came from defending too much. And nobody ever taught you that defending is expensive. Nobody ever told you that your explanation has a price tag, and that some audiences will charge you full price and give you nothing in return. So, tonight, I want you to start noticing something. I want you to notice the moment you feel the urge to explain yourself. And I want you to ask one question before you open your mouth. Is this person capable of understanding? And are they willing to understand? 'Cause if the answer to either one is no, then whatever you're about to say is a gift you're handing to someone who will drop it on the ground. And here's the thing about giving gifts to people who drop them on the ground. It doesn't hurt them. It hurts you. They don't lose anything. You lose your energy, your peace, and a little piece of your self-respect every time you beg for something you were never going to get. Now, let me name the people, because just like feelings wear disguises, the people who drain your explanations wear disguises too. They don't walk up and say, "Hello, I have no intention of ever understanding you." That would make it easy. Instead, they come dressed as something else. Something that keeps you talking long after you should have walked away. There are a few of these types in particular I want you to learn to recognize. The first is the one who asks questions, but never wants answers. This person seems on the surface to be interested. They ask you why. They ask you how. They seem to want to understand, so you explain. And then they ask again, slightly differently, as if your answer didn't count. And you explain again, and they ask again. Here's how you know what's really happening. A person who genuinely wants to understand gets closer to agreement with each answer. Their questions narrow. Their objections shrink. You can feel the gap closing. But this person's questions never narrow. They just multiply. Every answer you give spawns 2 new questions. That's not curiosity. That's a person who has decided to keep you talking, so they never have to concede anything. They're not gathering information. They're conducting an interrogation with no possibility of acquittal. And the moment you understand that you can stop answering, because there is no answer that ends the questioning. The questioning is the point. The questioning is how they keep you small and keep themselves in charge. The second type is the one who agrees to your face and doubts behind your back. This one is especially draining because you never quite feel finished. You explain and they nod. And they say, "Sure, I get it. That makes sense." And you walk away feeling like you finally got through. But then it comes back around. You hear that they said something to someone else. Something skeptical. Something that undoes everything you thought you'd settled. So you go back and explain again, trying to close the gap that reopened the moment your back was turned. And here's the truth you have to face. This person will never be closed. Their agreement to your face isn't real agreement. It's the path of least resistance. It's easier for them to nod than to argue. And so you keep chasing a resolution that this person is incapable of giving you because they were never actually in the conversation to begin with. They were just waiting for it to end. You cannot explain your way into someone's genuine support if their support was never on the table. All you can do is stop refilling a cup that has a hole in the bottom. The third type is the one who makes you feel like you owe them a reason. This one operates on guilt. They didn't do anything for you. They don't have authority over you. But somehow they've made you feel like your decisions require their sign off. And you can't quite figure out why you feel that way. You just feel this heaviness, this sense that if you don't explain yourself to them, you've done something wrong. Watch how they respond when you make a choice without consulting them. They act wounded. They get quiet. They say things like, "Oh, I guess you already figured it all out without me." And that little jab is designed to reel you back in, to make you rush to explain, to make you apologize for the crime of living your own life. Here's what you have to understand. You do not owe an explanation to everyone who feels entitled to one. Entitlement is not the same as deserving.